Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Before the formal start of the webinar, the recitation of the Holy Quran.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar. Fasalli li rabbika wanhar. Inna shani'aka huwal abtar.
Good afternoon. I'm Amna Sarabasi, Research Officer at the Institute of Regional Studies, Islamabad. I warmly welcome our distinguished speakers and all the participants into our webinar on Iran's presidential elections and regional implication. Now, I would like to request Ambassador Nadeem Riaz, President IRS, for welcome remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Amna. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, good afternoon and good morning to people as you are joining us from different parts of the world. It's really a pleasure seeing some old friends joining us. It's a galaxy of speakers. And we at the Institute are honored that you could join us and you could share your views on a subject which is of immense importance, I think not only to the region, but also to the entire world. The elections in Iran are important. What comes into power? What will be the regional implications? And especially in light of what is now going on in Afghanistan, the decision of US to withdraw, and all indications are that they will be leaving by the 4th of August or maybe by the middle of August. So I think it is important to see what will happen in Iran and how will Iran react and respond to the various challenges which are in the neighborhood, which are there to be settled. I think that is most important. So we would like to hear from the distinguished panel, and then I think we would learn much more from an interactive discussion, which I'm really looking forward to. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much, Amna, for organizing the event. And over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. We have Dr. FOUZIA AMIN with us today, who will moderate this session. Dr. FOUZIA AMIN is a lecturer at the Department of International Relations, National Defense University. Her PhD is on evolving strategic competition in the Indian Ocean, implication for the South Asian region. She did her MSc in Defense and Diplomatic Studies from Fatma Jinnah University, Rawalpindi, and MPhil in Strategic and Nuclear Studies from NDU. Her area of interest include nuclear strategy, nuclear politics of South Asia, power politics of Indo-Pacific, Iranian and Middle Eastern politics, and other regional issues. For further proceedings, I hand over the floor to Dr. FOUZIA AMIN. Over to you, ma'am.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much, Amna. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, and thanks to Institute of Regional Studies for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to moderate this wonderful session on Iranian presidential elections 2021. We have a wonderful panel of very distinguished speakers to deliberate on this subject. I will introduce them one by one later on. Let me set the stage first and provide the basic tone for this important event. The presidential elections in Iran set for 18th June 2021 will take place in the context of four important aspects. Firstly, it is the revocation of JCPOA in 2018 by the Trump administration. And secondly, it is the killing of some of the most key military and political figures like the commander of Quds forces, Qasem Soleimani, and the prominent nuclear scientist, Mohsen Farizadeh, and also the Iranian attack on Assad. That would be one of the important aspects. Thirdly, the imposition of US sanctions against Iran and the resultant worsening economic conditions. And lastly, it is the current situation as well, that is COVID-19 pandemic that has further weakened domestic economy and posed further challenges against the in-government regime, same that may influence the outcome of the elections. So this is a general perception that the elected president may adopt a hardliner posture vis-a-vis the US. However, with a deeper familiarity with Iran's domestic politics and international relations, reveal that Iran's foreign policy has always been pragmatic. Therefore, whoever is successful in elections, the world may have to deal Iran on the basis of civilian polity. Against this backdrop, this election is particularly impactful since it comes at a time when Iran is at an underway, and decisions made this time can change the trajectory of Iran's course completely for the next 4 years. Now, how the Iranian president will negotiate with the US President Joe Biden over the Iran's deal right now is crucial in determining the new US administration's approach with Iran. So the US backtrack allowed a voice to the conservatives in the Iran's parliament as the shambled economy I was mentioning earlier that was further worsened by additional sanctions imposed by the United States. The voices only intensified as one after the other, some of the most key military and political figures were assassinated. I was explaining earlier as well. And with the coupled frequent Israeli intrusion and manipulation of Iran's nuclear program, the facets have all acted as catalyst to ignite more momentum in the right wing, which has resulted in political aggression. And these are the underlying aspects that have resulted in the political engineering of the forthcoming elections to put the hardliners in absolute power to rebuff any aspects and prospects of reformation, to combat and avenge the actions of the past 8 years. So the Trump's irrational policies towards Iran also integrated it deeply with Iraq, Yemen, Syria, and elsewhere in the Middle East. And the long-standing Middle East Cold War might also finally be slowing down as a few weeks ago, Iran's foreign ministry stated for the first time that talks have been held with regional rival Saudi Arabia. While an Iranian president does not have complete power, considering the ultimate authority lies with the supreme leader, if Rouhani's successor takes a calm and conciliatory approach, it can go a long way in reducing hostilities in the region and in resolving Iran's catastrophic economic crisis brought about because of deviating sanctions and the pandemic. With this perspective, now I would like to invite the distinguished panelists to share their views, and it is indeed a great honor for me to introduce Ambassador RIFFAT MASOOD as first speaker of the session. Ambassador RIFFAT MASOOD is a career diplomat with wide experience of diplomacy and having fluency in Persian language. She joined the Foreign Services of Pakistan in July 1987. She also had various diplomatic assignments in the country's mission in the United Kingdom, the USA, Turkey, and France. She was section officer in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She served also as Director General Policy Planning, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She was also the Director General South Asia, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Ms. RIFFAT was also the Consul General at Consulate General of Pakistan, Los Angeles, USA, and she served as the Deputy High Commissioner, Pakistan as Commission, New Delhi, India. She served also as Pakistan's ambassador to Norway before she served as an ambassador to Iran. Her Excellency was Pakistan's first woman envoy to the Islamic Republic of Iran. Ambassador RIFFAT, I would request you to shed some light on what is the significance of elections and implications on socio-economic environment in Iran, given the various new challenges. Over to you, Ambassador RIFFAT.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much, FOUZIA, and thank you, Ambassador Nadeem Riaz and the Institute of Regional Studies for organizing this important webinar. As you have very lucidly pointed out in your introduction, Iran is a country which the whole world takes a deep interest in because of its particular political dispensation, as well as the stances and the stands it takes on various global issues and regional issues. The fact that it has a very unique form of government, a theocratic government, but at the same time, a mixed government. Sorry, you want me to start my video? I thought the video was already there. Sorry. So, it's a very an interesting country, and for Pakistan, of course, being a neighbor, being an important Muslim country, whatever happens in Iran has some form of an impact on us. Now, the elections. Before we get into the elections, I would like to just very briefly point out the unique system that exists in Iran, which maybe many of us in Pakistan and also around the world are not aware, although you have talked about it in your introduction. While we have a semblance of a mixed government, which was in fact introduced in 1979 after the revolution, and we have a parliament and you have a president, but the center of power remains with the Rehbar, the supreme leader, under the concept of Vilayat al-Fiqh, which was introduced by Imam Khomeini. Now, this essentially means that while you have this executive and you have a judiciary, it is all overseen by this one person who is in fact the head of the clergy. And this person, who is the Imam Khamenei at the moment, has immense power, immense control over what happens in Iran, both internally and externally. Now, the appointment of the Rehbar is also, just for information, done by an assembly of experts. They too are actually people who have been appointed by the Rehbar himself. So it's quite interesting that the people who appoint the Rehbar are also appointees of the previous Rehbar or the supreme leader. And they, in fact, decide to pick somebody who is very, very eloquent and who understands the Islamic law. He understands, has got a lot of political acumen, which in fact, this particular Rehbar, Imam Khamenei, has displayed on various occasions, and of course his personal piety. Now, the Rehbar's job is also then overseen by the Assembly of Experts, but rarely, in fact, almost never since they've been appointed, has the Assembly of Experts ever questioned the Rehbar's decisions. And the Guardian Council, which is also part of this system, which selects the presidents. And I use the word select because they, as you have mentioned, there were more than 500, almost 600 candidates, and the Guardian Council decided to reject all of them except for 7. This they did with the blessings of the Rehbar, So although there was a lot of hue and cry about why candidates were being rejected for one reason or the other, most of the candidates that were rejected were reformers, were moderates, pushing in front the hardliners, even important candidates like the Vice President Jahangiri, important candidates like the former Speaker Larijani, whose family is very influential and whose brother, in fact, is a member of the Guardian Council, but his candidature was also rejected. So it actually shows that even in the selection of or the short listing of these candidates, it is the Rehbar through the Guardian Council who will decide on the president. Now there are elections coming up, of course, and people will vote, despite the fact that they know that whatever their vote is, the final decision rests elsewhere. But this gives a semblance of, to the international community, to even to the people of Iran, some semblance that there is a system of some kind of a democratic system or an Islamic system in which their voices can also be heard. Now, what is important to note is that the power of the president, although he is the president, that is, he is elected or selected, and his power is actually quite limited when it comes to what he can do. His basic job is to execute the decisions made by the supreme leader. Those decisions, whether they are foreign policy related, whether they are related to the military defense forces, whether they are related to the economic situation, whether they are related to any, in fact, even appointments of ministers that he may want to appoint in his cabinet have to be done through, have to be endorsed by the Rehbar. That's why for me, I feel that while these elections are of course very, very important, and by the looks of it, the way that the selection of these candidates has been made, and the fact that the parliament voted in last February more hardliners than moderates, it seems that the hardline president will come in, and all indications are that the Chief Justice, Ibrahim Raisi, who is also another very influential clergyman, will become president. What is important to note is that whatever happens, it is the power lies with the supreme leader, and whatever he decides will happen. And this supreme leader is a very pragmatic person, as you yourself have pointed out. He was himself very much against the idea of going into a nuclear deal, which is known as the JCPOA, with the United States and with the other European countries. Because he says that, you cannot trust, that there is this historical animosity with the United States. But President Rouhani and his cabinet, and particularly his foreign minister Zarif, were able to convince him and prevail upon him, and they had to work very hard to get his endorsement for the JCPOA. So in fact, when President Trump pulled out of the JCPOA, this was a great embarrassment, not only to Iran, because of course the sanctions were slapped on and they had to suffer a great economic setback, but it was an embarrassment to the Rouhani government, because the supreme leader turned around and said, well, you see, I mean, this is what happens when you trust the shaitan-e-buzurg, as they like to call the Americans. Therefore, this president, whoever is elected, whether most likely he'll be a hardliner, but even if he is one of the reformers, and there are actually only two reformers out of the group. One of them was in fact the governor of the central bank, and his chances are diminished because many think that he will actually be just continuing Rouhani's policies. But anyway, whoever gets selected will actually be facing this task of what kind of negotiations to undertake, although the negotiations have already started with the United States and the JCPOA, but what line to take, what kind of conditions to put forth, these will rest greatly on the new president. And by all likelihood is that Iran will probably take a tougher stance. But notwithstanding that, I would also like to emphasize That the Iranians, being very rational and pragmatic politicians, they understand the difficulties that they are facing internally. At the moment, Iran is facing the worst economic crisis of its history. The devaluation of its currency, the rate of inflation, the rate of unemployment is really hurting the Iranian people. So the president, whoever is elected, will have to keep this in mind. And the next Iranian government would, of course, go into these negotiations with the E3 and the United States and Russia and China, members of the JCPOA, with an open mind, more of an open mind, to see what can be salvaged. First and foremost would be removal of the sanctions. I think this is a position that they have always stood by, and they will always continue to do so. Because the economic situation will take center stage, and that will be what will decide, not so much foreign policy. This actually happens in most countries. That foreign policy is hardly an issue which touches domestic policies when it comes to elections. The only foreign policy issue, of course, is the relations with the United States, which no government in Iran is going to try and move forward with. Also in the Middle East, you see, the Middle East is very important for Iran. Its relations with Saudi Arabia, its relations with its border countries. Iran has invested a lot, and therefore they will also want to make sure that there's any strategic decision which is taken is on the basis of ensuring that Iran's influence, as it were, or Iran's importance in its immediate neighborhood to the West remains. Its relations with Saudi Arabia may start improving, but if a hardline government comes in, one never knows what kind of position they will take. Although indications have appeared that relations with Saudi Arabia are on, at least talks are taking place, at least they're talking about it. Coming closer to home, Pakistan and our region, I think we have a lot of similarities when it comes to peace and security in this region, especially vis-a-vis Afghanistan. And I think that in that, Iran and Pakistan will continue and should continue to cooperate. I think any government coming into Iran will ensure that with the withdrawal of the United States from Afghanistan, stability remains there, and they would like to cooperate with Pakistan because they know that Pakistan's role is very important in that. And also with China. I think for its economic survival, relations with China are very important, and Iran will continue to work with the Chinese in inviting more investments into their own country. And with us, of course, they will continue to work for the border security along our mutual borders, as well as trying to improve the economic or trade relations between our two countries. Of course, much depends on what will happen once the government comes into power. But just to add here that since power rests a lot with the Rehber himself, I would like to point out that through my own experience, I find that the Rehber has a very soft corner, I should say, or a friendly, very friendly disposition towards Pakistan. And I have noticed that on various occasions in meetings and in his statements. So I think that whoever comes into power in Iran, I think bilaterally in our relations will continue the way they are, and they would improve. But of course, what happens in the region and what happens globally depends on the position that the Rehber will take with his president. Thank you. I hope I was audible and visible, I'm not sure.
Yes, Ambassador RIFFAT, you are audible. Thank you so much for giving your valuable comments on the Iranian elections. Dr. RIFFAT, you have rightly pointed out that whatever happens in Iran also impacts on us, and you have given the detailed overview of the Iranian electoral system and the powers of the supreme leader. You have also pointed out that Iran is important for China and for the other regional states as well. So with this, I would like to invite the second speaker of this session. But just a little housekeeping before we move to the second speaker. If you have any questions during the presentations, please type them into the chat box in your Zoom control panel. You can also raise your hands. I'll bring them up during the presentations, and we will also have time for questions at the end. Now we have another distinguished speaker in this panel who has done extensive research on the regional politics, Dr. Mohammad Athar Javed. Mr. Javed is the DG at Pakistan House, a Denmark-Pakistan-based think tank of international affairs. He is also an International Security Program Fellow at New America, which is a renowned think tank. He is visiting lecturer at Center for Excellence Defense Against Terrorism, Turkey, besides holding masters in English literature from Pakistan and masters in European journalism studies from Cardiff University, UK. Dr. Javed has also studied for PhD at the Institute for Cross-Cultural Studies, University of Copenhagen. He has been a visiting faculty at Royal Danish Defence College, University of Rome, National Defence University, Islamabad, where I had a good interaction with Dr. Javed. He is also visiting faculty at Quaid-e-Azam University, Islamabad. He has also served in numerous capacities at various governmental and intergovernmental organizations, including Canadian Council for Peace and International Security, Copenhagen Peace and Research Institute, People's University, Denmark, Center for Future and Strategic Studies, Kuwait University. He regularly appears at national and international media. He also writes for national and international English dailies. He is also author of a book, which is Biting the Silver Bullet, Role of Pakistan's State Institutions in War on Terror. So now you can take us into the regional level and share your insights on how you believe that Iranian elections might affect the regional politics. Over to you, Dr. Athar Javed.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fouzia, for an introduction. I think I need to speaker's view. Maybe if someone can change that at the moment at the gallery. So if someone can change from your tech team, that they can ensure that it's a speaker's view, not galleries, so people can see us clearly. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, I can hear you.
Yeah, you have to change the speaker's view.
Okay.
So just go in that setting and put the speaker's view, yeah. So that's how I'm going to start right now, so people can understand who's speaking.
I hope it is fine now.
No, it is not yet.
I think with me it is fine because it's speaker view now.
No, it's you are I'm the speaker, so my view should come. Yours should be gone. I think your host, who is if you are the host, you just go on the three dots. Okay. If someone is the host, he can do it. It's right. Yeah, now it's fine. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Fouzia, again. And I appreciate Ambassador Nadeem and the Institute, also Amna Abbasi, and especially my previous colleague, Ambassador RIFFAT MASOOD. I would start actually by saying, first of all, to introduce that why I'm here. It's my 30th year in studying Iranian internal politics and Iran itself as a country study. This is my introduction into this today's webinar. The second is that there are not many people actually, it's true what Ambassador RIFFAT said, Her Excellency, that not many people actually know in Pakistan what internal politics of Iran is. And frankly, Iran's internal politics has been considered the most stable politics in the region because of its continuously holding election, because it has parallel political structures. Supreme leader, Rahbar's office, we call it Ayatollah al-Uzma, we call it Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, as his designation, a veteran of Iranian revolution, and also was very, very close to Ayatollah al-Uzma, we call them Imam Khomeini. The role of, before I get into this, it is important to understand that vetting of candidates is, although based on, we call it Guardian Council, Shura-e-Nigeban, it still involves, because the Shura-Nigeban, there are 6 clergy members, and they are, their level of literacy in religious fiqh is very high. And then we have 6 jurisprudent. They also have then both law, I mean, they are very competent, but that we have to understand. The vetting of candidates come with the overall, their profiling. And that doesn't really involve, I mean, some may understand that it's a discrimination against other candidates, but it's based on, if you understand what Guardian Council is, Guardian Council is exactly the way they want to protect the revolution of Iran. And they want to understand that how a candidate's views, the global view, internal view, because there are no really clear 2 lines, conservatives or reformers. It's not like that. There are different shades. There are multiple shades of views about, because at the moment, if we look into Iranian international stature and the domestic stature, we will understand that Iran has a unique system, and that system must be understood before we really get into understand what is a presidential election going to do. If one-liner, I can say that the presidential election is just a continuity of other elections. Look, we got President Khatami for 2 terms. He was involved in all kind of reforms in different structures, especially in the foreign policy. And Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the Rahbar, the supreme leader, we call him. Basically, if we look at the Vilayat-e-Faqih system itself, because Vilayat-e-Faqih system doesn't impede other institutions, it becomes the center of gravity and continue to revolve around them and create a functionality in the system. That's what Wali-e-Faqih, or the current Wali-e-Faqih, is doing. The second point is the Council of Experts, we call it Majlis-e-Khubargan. That Council of Experts has also, they are different kind of, all kind of reformist, and we call them, making more simplifying for our viewers, ultra-conservative, conservative, all these terminology, which actually basically Western political understanding of the Iranian politics. Internally, Iran doesn't look like that. I mean, the Chap, Ras, they call it left, right, and the center, like President Hashmi Rafsanjani was, former president, late Hashmi Rafsanjani. He was considered very pragmatic. Of course, after President Khatami, we have President Ahmadinejad, who showed some teeth to the United States. We must also remember that these elections also revolve not only between policies between Iran and US, but Iran and Saudi Arabia, but elections as such actually does not affect the relationship of Iran with other countries. That we must understand. Because there are set policies for the Middle East, there are set narratives for Iran's regional influence, there are set narratives already settled within this collage of different center of powers within Iran. It's like division of political thought, and then include the the final word of the supreme leader. That is why in Iranian constitution, Rahbar's role is like a father, they call it, that he would steer things in a way in which revolution remains intact, but the political thoughts and all other also come in play. Number one, this I said that the regional connectivity relationship, yes, it does one thing very important. There was a suspension of US negotiation, but that is all should be taxed on US policies. Former President Trump suspended and discarded that, although the Europeans were still on the sideline. And I know Ayatollah Sadiq Larijani and Ali Larijani myself personally. I know most of these players, including Mohsen Rezai. I can tell you, they all are for the revolution. Yes, they want some systems reformation within the system. They do not want revolution over revolution. This we should understand. So Iran's current election would do two important things to the system. One is there would be a continuity, my assessment, and there's already continuity. They have gone very long in Vienna in different negotiation. They're almost very close to, maybe once this election is over, they may have a deal again, and there is a great possibility. And we should remember this all cannot be done without the blessing of the supreme leader, the Rahbar. This we must understand. Secondly, there is a misunderstanding, but when I say misunderstanding, I can say the miscomprehension about Iran's real internal politics. And those who study Iran inside out, like their all institutions, different structures, they must understand Iran wants to sustain, Iran has sustained successfully all these US sanctions since 1979, these wars. And of course, United States has given Iran carte blanche and also sort of a legitimacy to expand its influence when US went into Iraq on a bad intelligence of WMD. Iran's role expanded. So the actual worry should be for other countries, not for Iran itself, because Iran has provided this with, they call it popular legitimacy, that they combine this. Madam very aptly remarked about that it appears that the theocratic government. But if you go into Iran's different institutions and talk to the people, you will find them, they are as modern as any talk in the Tehran University, for example, in Mashhad, in Imam. Do you have different discussions in Hawza Hujjati Ilmiya in Qom? You sit down, they will talk to you on very candidly on everything. All these ayatollahs, they will talk to you, they will ask you questions. So the issue we must understand that Iran provides a one or the other kind of stability if Iran's relations with the Saudi Arabia, which are actually also improving. On the current update, they are agreeing and their talks are continued already because of because Saudi Arabia also is being under transformation. They have also taken this new inertia through the Crown Prince MBS, Mohammed bin Suleiman, in order to ensure that the Yemen war winds down. And they want this Gulf region to be more stable and economically perspective. For this, Iran is playing the new role we call a post-conflict role to stabilize the Gulf region, the Middle East. And then we also have a problem with understanding of that for example, Speaker Ali Larijani and Mohsen Rezai is like, Mohsen Rezai is in, but Ali Larijani and the other we were supposed to be senior vice president, the candidate, according to the reformist, we can call them, that they should have been, both should have been in the race. The issue here is not this. The issue here is the stances and how Ibrahim Raisi is one component who had been respected in all areas by all leadership, from Council of Experts to Shura Nigaban. And when we say respect, it is not a favor. We must understand that the rejection, or it's not a selection, once again, it's although it looks like from outside is a selection, that as if the supreme leader has selected all the. I mean, this is a very vicious cycle of argument where the supreme leader select the selectors who selects him in the end. But that is of the Council of Experts. The Guardian Council's role has been like this. For example, former President Ahmadinejad was a blue-eyed boy of the supreme leader, the Rahbar. But when after that, what happened was, due to the presence of President Ahmadinejad, Iran was being isolated more and more. Supreme leader doesn't want this. Rahbar doesn't want Iran to be isolated and the next generation to suffer more at the hands of the US and Western sanctions. So this is a real picture. The real picture is Iran sustained a long and harsh sanctions. So from the Pakistani point of view, from the regional point of view, stability in the political system of Iran will not be ending soon, as it is predicted by very big analysts, Western analysts, that, as if there will be something happen if this president come. Nothing will happen. He will be a modern face, modern or, can say moderated phase type of President Ahmadinejad. Because while he was in judiciary, he has been, of course, condemned by the West in different ways. But Iranian system, the Vilayat-e-Faqih system itself, that's why it's called center of gravity, because Vilayat-e-Faqih was included in Iranian constitution in order to protect the revolution, but also to protect the structures created in post-Shah Iran. So this is the picture, that as such, Iran's presidential election will not affect that much. Inside, it will not do anything, but yes, one thing may happen. That is, since he's a very senior, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the Rahbar, is aging. And there will be another, maybe a selection of Vilayat-e-Faqih will come. That will maybe, we don't know. He's fine at the moment, he's gone through different, but this is a different debate. Today's debate, I think we should understand that if Iran becomes, as Iran and Saudi Arabia are trying to have a rapprochement, and then Iran's negotiation with the President Biden's team is really going very well. And there will be, someone will maybe very soon in the elections, maybe in close to summer or close to the withdrawal completed 11 September 2021 from Afghanistan, you would see a double, triple, multiple news coming out of. So this will again prove that the Supreme Leader's decision and the Guardian Council decision to select Ibrahim Raisi as the prominent candidate would also show. So, but of course, as a Pakistani, as a member of the think tank, and we do have our own opinions maybe, but frankly, Iran's political system is really very, very difficult to understand, but it does not affect us that much in Iran's internal politics. Iran's foreign policy and the policy as a whole in the Middle East, if it becomes neutral, they become friends or rapprochement, as Pakistan has tried, Pakistan Prime Minister offered their services. Pakistan has been, because both countries are brotherly countries, and we want both countries to play a positive role for Pakistan and the region in Afghanistan to stabilize. And Afghanistan, I remember Ambassador, His Excellency Ambassador Nadeem mentioned from the start about Iran's role in Afghanistan. That is very, very important because of the Bamiyan province, because of the Shia minority there. So all this otherwise as well, the Taliban's relation with Iran are also there, like they have with Russia. So if we look comprehensively, I'm going to conclude on 2 points. One, that Iran's presidential election will not affect as a regional relationship or relation with the US. It will not affect that much actually, because Supreme Leader's decision to negotiate with US on Iranian mutual respect terms is the fair one, because Iran never backed out. Iran never withdrew from the negotiation process. Number two, if President Ibrahim Raisi, the judiciary chief, becomes the president, it would be rather more responsibility on his shoulder than President Rouhani to give something, deliver something to the Iranian nation. after all those sanctions, after all those suspension during President Trump, there is a time now for President, if he selects, if he's elects, it's a time for him would be difficult to deliver according to the desires of Iranian people, because of course Iranian people also, like us and other, deserves to live in without sanction. And Pakistan knows very well what sanctions are. I really appreciate for your patience hearing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. ATHAR, for such a comprehensive analysis about the Iran's political structure and Iran's different dynamics. You have rightly said that Iran has a good system and we need to understand its structure and system. And since the constitution revolution in Iran, it is the only country with regular elections. But there is also a paradox, as Iran is a theocracy, but at the same time, Iranian democracy may not be dictated by theocracy, and it is pragmatic in nature. With a deeper familiarity with Iran's domestic politics and international relations, reveal that Iran's foreign policy has always been pragmatic, and the rebel does not want his country to suffer in the future because of the US policies. With this perspective, now I would like to introduce our last speaker, who is also a practitioner as well as an academic expert, Dr. Absal Ashraf. Dr. Absal Ashraf is a PhD, currently working as an assistant professor of international relations and security at the University of Nottingham. He had a long career in the UK military, retiring early as a senior officer, and served in Iraq as a counterinsurgency and political specialist. And he also served in Afghanistan as an intersecurity advisor to the Ministry of Interior. He also served in various UK government departments. Mr. Afzal has wide-ranging policy experience working in the UK Foreign Office with DFID and the MOD. He has been senior government advisor on counterterrorism and security issues. Dr. Afzal, attached as a consultant fellow at the Royal United States Institute, United Kingdom. Dr. Ashraf has extensive experience of working with global media, including press, radio, and television, where he speaks on defense, security, and diplomacy issues, as well as on technology topics. He has some regional political and security expertise in the Middle East and Southeast Asian politics. He is a regular contributor of international newspapers and also contributed several chapters in different books related to this security and deterrence. Dr. Ashraf, I would request you to share your academic insight about the impact of upcoming Iranian elections. Over to you, Dr. Afzal Ashraf.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum. Can I first thank you, Dr. Fouzia, I hope you can hear me, and also the Director General, His Excellency Nadeem Riaz, for inviting me. It's 15 years since I was last invited to a Regional Studies Institute event. That one was a global conference on terrorism, which was inaugurated by President Musharraf himself. And the significant thing about that is that, having attended and participated in many conferences over the years, that was and remains the most global conference that I've ever attended. We had obviously regional experts, we had experts from Europe, from the USA, some very senior people from the USA, but we also had experts from China and Russia. And I can say that I've never attended such a global conference before or since, and I think that speaks volumes for the Regional Studies Institute's reach and impact, and I'm glad to see that you're continuing that. So thank you very much for the invitation. Turning now to the matter of the day, I'm honored to have learned a great deal from Her Excellency Ambassador RIFFAT, and also from the Director General JAVED, who have both given us a very detailed insight into the complexities and the personalities involved in Iranian politics, which I certainly lack. But I understand that the objective of the discussion today is to talk about the impact that these elections may or may not have on the regional dynamics, but particularly also on the relationship with Saudi Arabia and the wider Middle Eastern region. And I will address those, I hope, very briefly in turn, with a couple of caveats. One is that you cannot really think about even regional dynamics or the relationship with Saudi Arabia or the relationship with the Middle East without understanding the global dynamics, particularly the relationship, of course, with the US, which has been mentioned already a couple of times, but also the relationship with Europe, and indeed the sort of peripheral players such as Russia and China and so on. So it's a very complex system of interactions that I will only touch on. I don't even promise to untangle hugely. So what do the regional dynamics, how will they change? Well, the only thing that I can add to the discussion, I think, that has taken place so far, is that whoever the new president is, notwithstanding the limitations of their powers and influence, whoever the new president is, will be one of the first presidents who will inherit a situation that's different from the last 2 decades. And it's different in that the USA, which has been present, neighboring Iran with its forces in the guise of Iraq and Afghanistan, will be virtually absent by the time this new president gets into office and establishes themselves. Now, what does that mean? Well, there is what I would describe as a strategic paranoia that nations have when they are in close proximity to a security threat or a perceived security threat. And certainly in the last decade and a half or more, the Iranians have been surrounded in the West and the East with US forces in the wars that we've already mentioned. And of course, that causes a great deal of perceptions of insecurity, and that actually colors the way nations react, both within themselves domestically, but also within the region. So what do we mean by that? Well, before we begin to think this as a particular thing with Iran, it's well worth thinking that this is something, in my experience, in my, if you like, appreciation, security paranoia gets worse when you are a powerful nation. And we can see that, for example, in the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 1960s, when the USA reacted very aggressively to the the Soviet plan to base missiles in Cuba in very close proximity to the mainland of the United States. Similarly, we can see what's unfolding now with what Russia perceives to be NATO encroachment of its backyard in the Ukraine and elsewhere in Europe. So this idea of, and it's my idea of security paranoia, is one that I think is definitely worth thinking about. And I think that will hopefully lead to an easing of tensions, easing of concerns that Iran might have. And so in its immediate neighborhood, particularly when dealing with Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, and even slightly further afield with Turkey and so on, I think, if you like, the atmosphere, the political atmosphere, I think, will be a lot more relaxed. And that's something, of course, we can revisit when the time comes. Turning on to the Iran and Saudi relationships, yes, it appears that there's some form of rapprochement, some form of easing of tensions going on. But the major obstacle in that relationship right now is what I would describe, and I promise not to be emotive after this, but I can't think of a better term, the most obscene conflict anywhere in the world today, and that is the conflict in Yemen. It's a conflict where Saudi Arabia and Iran are on opposite sides. It's a conflict that's been going on for 6 years or more, and it's a conflict in which millions of innocent Yemeni civilians have suffered and continue to suffer. And they do this simply because these two great nations, Saudi Arabia and Iran, feel that the government in Yemen should be of a particular hue. Now, I'm not equating responsibility between Saudi Arabia and Iran. I'm not, if you like, bringing them both on an equivalence. We can debate whether Saudi Arabia perhaps has more initiative and involvement in that conflict than Iran. But the point I'm making is that they are the two main players. Whatever the reality of the ground, the perception is that they are both engaged in this conflict on opposite sides. And this conflict, like all wars in recent years, is going nowhere. It's not going to be resolved through military means. And the sooner these two nations understand the obscenity of this policy, the futility of this policy, the sooner not only can this conflict be brought to some form of a close, then the wider relationship between these two countries can hopefully become much more positive and much more constructive and mutually beneficial and regionally beneficial as well. So what do we think in terms of the wider Middle Eastern relationship? Well, the important player in the Middle East, particularly as far as Iran is concerned, is, of course, Israel. And Israel has been at the forefront of the international, particularly the US, campaign to enforce sanctions and worse against Iran. And that relationship between Israel and the rest of the Middle East has, of course, transformed in the last year or so, with countries like the UAE recognizing Israel. And of course, I know that my fellow experts will be far better informed than me about the, if you like, behind the scenes closeness that might exist between Saudi Arabia and Israel. So Israel, certainly in its foreign policy, is being hugely successful in the Middle East. And this has had the effect of isolating Iran and may well continue to have an influence. And of course, we're talking about elections. We've had elections in Israel, and it looks like we have a change of government there. And the Prime Minister Netanyahu, if he does remain out of power and indeed out of prison, I wonder whether it will change much. We have a new government, if it sustains itself with a very liberal, relatively liberal, and a relatively hawkish probably much more right-wing than Prime Minister Netanyahu coming into government. So what is that going to do? I don't know, to be perfectly honest, but I would guess, just like the description we've had, very good description that we've had from the previous two speakers about the institutional continuity of foreign policy in Iran, I think we will see to a large degree the institutional antipathy that Israel has towards what it perceives as an Iranian threat continuing. So I don't perceive to be any great change, but I do perceive that Israel will have a greater influence on Iranian and Middle Eastern relationships than perhaps previous Iranian presidents have experienced. Okay, so what about the wider issue? Well, as I've said, the wider issue involves, of course, the USA, and of course the Biden government is bound in some way to reinstate the JCPOA, but it can't do so on original terms. And of course, this is going to seem, and understandably seem, hugely unfair to the Iranians, and any form of renegotiation is going to be a form of, or perceived as some form of backing down. And so there we're going to have a political issue where pragmatism is going to need to confront the ideological reality, particularly the rhetorical reality that exists in Iran that we don't talk about, we haven't spoken about a great deal, but it does. And the fact is that the revolutionary zeal, this creation in Iran of the ultimate, the great Satan, all of that is going to impede the pragmatist approach to negotiation. And one of the things that perhaps I might take a slightly different tag to certainly Her Excellency Ambassador RIFFAT on is the relationship between domestic policy and international relations. And it's what academics will call the intermestic, the international and domestic. And certainly research done by one of my students recently indicates, and she looked at the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei's rhetoric, and mapped out the fact that whenever there was a legitimacy crisis within the revolutionary movement, the Supreme Leader would use, certainly in his rhetoric, the nuclear issue as a diversion. From his perspective, to be fair, he would be using it to solidify the nation, to if you like, strengthen its resolve, its resistance to what he perceives as external threats. But the point is that it serves, whatever his intentions, to distract from the very significant problems the country is facing. These have been detailed by the previous speakers far better than I could. The economic problems, the social problems, which perhaps aren't often talked about very much. So there is this intermestic thing going on that I don't think we should underestimate, where the effect of global sanctions, which are hugely severe, is impeding internal development. And rather than finding a way out, certainly in the first instance, the instincts have always been to strengthen resistance through rhetorical means by deflecting, legitimately or otherwise, domestic attention to the enemy outside, primarily the US and of course Israel too. So whilst I think there is a great deal of room for optimism, particularly if Iran is emboldened and rather than being emboldened, become more confident and more relaxed about immediate threats within the region, and can make progress on the Yemeni conflict, which would be a massive change, not just in avoiding a foreign policy distraction, but a huge change in humanitarian terms and in regional terms, moral and ethical terms. It will be a great win if this ghastly conflict can be put to a rest, allowing the Iranians to use that energy, that intellectual capacity to deal with the bigger problems they face, particularly with negotiations on sanctions, so that sanctions can be reduced and ideally lifted, so that the country can develop, the people within that country can achieve their potential and indeed prosper and bring about regional prosperity and stability. So I think that it is a case of beginning with what are small but hugely important problems and expanding outwards. And I hope that certainly some of the positive things that are beginning to open up with this local security situation, and possibly with a change in the Israeli dynamics, if they're interpreted pragmatically, may well lead to an improvement. Anyway, I look forward to being challenged on any of the things I've said, and I look forward to a very exciting discussion.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ashraf, for sharing your insights about the topic. Finally, after the whole discussion, in my humble view, because of the multiple internal and external factors, Iran's domestic, political and social environment is not very friendly to the political hierarchy. Due to economic hardship, people are also frustrated and to prove as catalyst for unlimited unrest in the country if they are not kept under constant check. So the supreme Iranian leadership is also mindful of those forces, both internal and external, that can exploit the situation. Therefore, it will continue to maintain a hardline approach for its survival also, and the situation could change with the change of attitude of US and its allies towards Iran. Only time would tell when the political and strategic environment of the region change for good. With this now, we will go ahead and take some time for questions. Just a reminder, please be sure to type your questions into the question box or raise your hands in your control panel. Please be brief and clear in asking questions and making comments. I read questions from chat window for the speakers to answer. The first question is The first question is from Jamal Said Abbasi, and his question is for Ambassador RIFFAT MASOOD. And the question is, can presidential elections 2021 reshape Iran again from the aspect of economy, inflation rate, that Iran is currently facing worst economy crisis? Ambassador RIFFAT, need your comments.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, it all depends actually on the outcome of the talks in Vienna and the lifting of the sanctions, or at least easing of some sanctions. Because as long as the sanctions are there, although of course, the economy is the central question and the central issue in this presidential election, or in any election for that matter. And many of the candidates, including the frontrunner, Ibrahim Raisi, has talked about diversifying the economy and moving it away from an oil-based economy to looking at more alternative ways in reviving the economy. But until the sanctions are eased, because these particular sanctions, if you recall, are crippling the financial institutions of Iran. So the first and foremost challenge that the president will face is to find ways in which he can revive the economy, or at least stabilize it, especially the continued devaluation of the currency, stabilize it so that, you know, the Iranian people can get some sort of relief. Now, if the sanctions continue the way they are, and if the talks in Vienna don't materialize, and if the situation remains, then diversifying an economy takes time. And Iran, in the short run, will continue to face the economic challenges that it does, and the people will continue to suffer. So a short answer to that basically is that it all depends on how they play out the sanctions game, and how the new president and his team is able to negotiate in Vienna and with the United States on and the other countries that are part of the JCPOA in lifting these sanctions.
Thank you so much, Ambassador RIFFAT. Now, I would like to give a chance to the people who have raised their hands. Ambassador Nadeem Riaz, would you like to comment, or you have any question?
Thank you very much. I have a question. Like, you know, the question is regarding the relationship of the Afghan leaders with the Taliban. And I would my question is to the distinguished panelists, that how do you see that everything indicates that the Taliban are going to come into a situation where they would be running the government. I mean, it could be a while, but, like, you know, all facts point towards that. Now, how would Iran interact with the Taliban? I know that, you know, over the last years, they have maintained a relationship. Now, what do the honorable panelists think, that would this relationship continue? Could it be affected by any change? Because the relationship, because Iran's role in Afghanistan is of key importance. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Nadeem. Dr. Athar, JAVED,
Yeah.
would you like to answer this question?
Yes, I would like to do that. Well, thank you very much. It's a very pertinent question, actually, especially for us because this is really relevant to us and also to the regional stability. Well, it's the communication, the connections have been with Iran from Taliban have been quite for a long time. Taliban has been using this as a transit as well to travel. And Iran, for this matter, has been very much, have been host since even the post 9/11, actually. There were many people did stay in Iran. They did take some few there. Also, the leadership also have been in connection. I think this is my understanding and assessment of the situation, that Iran this time would have understood by now that the previous conflict between Taliban and the attack on this consulate, and this has been things of the past. They have both come really ahead of that incident, and the animosity between these two. The sectarian angle has been intimate now at the moment. So there is a good chance that Iran would lend support to Taliban in terms of stabilizing, because, as I said in the earlier, because of the presence of the Shia minority also, and Iran doesn't want that part to be suffered because of the regional policies. So I think it would be, I would say, positive interaction, and there would be a support coming forth from Iran, because Iran also likes to be seen as a stabilizer outside the Middle East, because we all, and very rightly pointed out Dr. Ashraf, my colleague from United Kingdom, that it's a complex relationship, but these relationship will, in the end, will compose the image and the perception about Iran, whether rhetoric or you know, a reality on the ground. On the ground, it's a fact that Taliban has and they have connections, and we at our Pakistani end, we do expect a positive response if we are saying the Taliban come back and rule. And we all also know that this is happening with the consent and with the willingness of the United States as well. It cannot be really just thrusted upon Taliban that they have somehow, it has been negotiated in different parts with inter-Afghan dialogue between the Afghan government and the Taliban, Russians, Chinese, Iranians. So Iranian would play a role because they want to protect also and stabilize that region where the Bamiyan province and all others. So in my understanding, it would be a positive interaction this time. And that's my assessment, because based on the current level of interactions and the frequency between Taliban and Iranian regime.
Okay, we have another question from Mr. Shahid. He is from NDU. And the question is, keeping in context of the past Iranian presidents, Mehdi, Buzagan, Bani Sardar, and Ahmadinejad, what will be the role of IRGC as it has an institutionalized role in the Iranian politics? Anyone from the panelists? Yes, Dr. Atel.
Yes, look, I think you're a student, the student from Andy, you must understand the IRGC is is a premier military organization of Iran. So, I mean, Iran's IRGC's role, I mean, this is, as I said, it's a rhetoric in place. Of course, IRG is the most dominant. We got two armies, regular army, Atesh, and then we have Pasdaran Inqilab, IRGC. IRGC is, of course, elite, and they have they have then down their SSG like Quds Force, and they have their own dynamics and their own system to defend their country and all that. IRGC's role will not be, is nothing to do with this election. IRGC's powers come from its role, expanded role already in as a player, actually real player within Iran, and also outside Iran. They protect Iranian interests for that matter. So I would say that this, even President Ibrahim Raisi he cannot do anything to IRGC. Again, it's a supreme leader who comes in, this interplays its powers, and also the IRGC's role is to render support to the Iran's supreme leader and its institutions to defend against external threats and also the regional threats, external, when I say external, beyond their borders, like, for example, when it comes to, the expanded military in the Strait of Hormuz, you feel tension between U.S. naval fleet, or something happens in other part of in different waters, high water, international waters. So I think IRGC's role is like any countries, like if you say United Kingdom's military or Pakistan military, IRGC's role will remain as it should remain. It won't change. It has nothing to do with basically these elections.
Okay, thank you. Next question is also from the people who have raised their hands. Imran Sardar, are you there? Would you like to ask?
Yes. Thank you very much, Dr. FOUZIA, for giving me the opportunity to ask the question. I do not have a particular question. I just want to comment, and I want some clarification. So almost everyone is agreed that the central power remains with the supreme leader, and the coming president election, the coming president cannot take an independent stand. So these elections have actually no meaning, particularly in the domain of foreign policy decisions. So what's the point in bringing Raisi to the surface? On the other hand, it has been said that Ibrahim Raisi, with the rise of Raisi, nuclear talks with the United States would be complicated. But I think the supreme leader is bringing the Raisi, the hardliner, to strengthen Iran's position at nuclear talks. he is bringing Raisi to negotiate with the US on a position of elevation so that Iran may get the relief unconditionally. I would request the panelists to please counter comment.
Yes, I tend to agree with what you're saying. In fact, it is always better and easier to negotiate with conservatives and hardliners, especially if you're in a situation like this, because through the past few years, when the Rouhani government was talking to the United States and other countries to revive the JCPOA and to revive the economy and remove sanctions. Sorry, you can't hear me?
Sorry, yaar. Raat you called, I had gone off to sleep.
Sorry?
Please continue, Ambassador RIFFAT.
So, but basically, many diplomats and many other countries do agree that if the nuclear deal, or the JCPOA as it known, is to meet the light of day, the best case scenario would be to talk to hardliners. Because you see, as I mentioned in my talk, that the Supreme Leader was initially against this whole idea. And it was through constant convincing by Rouhani and his cabinet that we should, with the Obama administration, we should take this chance and we should try to move ahead. And Iran needs it, and Iran's economy will depend upon it, and we'll be able to sell our oil. So he was convinced, but when Trump pulled out, it just vindicated his stance. So the Americans and the other members of the JCPOA, the Europeans especially, they know that the decision making is with the Rehbar, and if the Rehbar puts forward some conditions whereby this JCPOA can be salvaged in some way, then they would much rather talk to somebody like Raisi, who's a conservative and who is a hardliner, because they know that he will have the ear of the Rehbar. Now, that's not to say that Rouhani and Zarif did not have the ear of the Rehbar, but they knew that the hardliners were controlling the politics, and especially after February, when the hardliners are now controlling the parliament also, it would suit the Western countries to talk to Raisi. And this is again, as I said, Khamenei is very sharp. He's got very strong political acumen, and he feels that maybe bringing a strong-willed conservative hardliner like Raisi in the forefront may bring about some benefits for Iran when they are talking about the nuclear deal. Also, domestically, I mean, your earlier part of your question about the domestic role, you see, elections, as I said, focus on domestic politics. That is very important. But in this particular case, don't forget, Raisi has been known by many to be a contender for the post of Rehbar itself, because when he was the governor of Khorasan and when he was made Chief Justice, many felt that, well, maybe Khamenei has made this move to sideline him. It could be that by making Raisi president or accepting him as a president, the Khamenei will have a better chance at finding a replacement for himself and not Raisi, because you see, and so Iranian politics are they're very interesting, because there's a lot of in-house tussle going on, power struggles going on in between the lines, which one does not really definitely see. But I think by making Raisi president, it also opens a way to get better deal for Iran, but also opens more candidates or more options for the role of the replacement of the Rehbar eventually, which Dr. Saab had referred to earlier. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Ambassador RIFFAT. We have Nabila Jafar's question. She is from IRS. Her question is, what can be the best possible course of actions of Iran and Saudi Arabia, which will lead to normalization in their relations? And what can be the challenges and rewards if they soften their stances towards each other? Dr. Ashraf, would you like to answer this question?
Well, yes, I think I've attempted to answer it anyway, and that is that one of the opportunities for improving relationships is this conflict that that they're, if you like, on opposite sides of. I think that would be a great confidence building measure. In any relationship, you need to have little confidence building steps, and that could be a very useful way of achieving a betterment of relationships. The challenges and rewards are potentially huge. I think a lot of the problems in the Middle East come about because of this almost artificial confrontation that exists between the Shia and Sunni versions of Islam. And of course, this is something that is hugely capitalized by extremists, and extremists pose an equal threat to both Sunnis and Shias, regardless of whatever background they come from. So there are huge challenges and rewards. The other thing that Iran could do through betterment of relationships is, of course, to use influence that clearly the Saudis and other Gulf states have. And I don't want to in any way suggest that they have huge amounts of influence over Israeli foreign policy or even US foreign policy, but they do have some. And every little bit counts. And they could use that influence to help with what I would suspect, what I fully believe, in fact, are going to be the most difficult negotiations ever. And we've had, lots of very informed comments on those negotiations. The point is that just the very fact that the Iranian economy is known to be suffering, society is known to be suffering, there is opposition within Iran against the government and systems. This works in favor of the other side, of those in the US and indeed in Israel that wish to, if you like, put pressure on Iran to have a change of the governance systems. And so the negotiations are going to be skewed. We have a country that is actually suffering as a result of sanctions, and those that want to put sanctions on to cause that suffering are now in a position where they believe that their ultimate objective is near. So why would they have an incentive to relieve those sanctions, even though policy-wise they've said they would? So here we might see the Iranians upping the ante, so to speak. And one of the things we forget is that the reason why the Europeans, and of course, ultimately the US was keen on the GCPA, was that the Israelis were threatening to attack Iran with obvious consequences. So you have this incentive in some ways for Iran to up the ante by accelerating its nuclear program, by making more threatening sounds, increasing the pressure from Israel to take military action, which then they might calculate, and it could be a miscalculation, would increase the pressure or rather offset some of the pressure that the Americans and the Europeans may be putting on Iran to renegotiate the JCPA. So we've got a very complex situation. And in that complexity, this tiny, relatively tiny relationship between Iran and Saudi Arabia, the sooner it gets better and the better it gets, will help Iran immeasurably.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ashraf. Now we have Humaira Iqbal's question, and she's asking that how can Iran and Pakistan overcome inconsistencies in their bilateral relations? Can we expect economic cooperation between the two in near future? Anyone can comment on this question.
Just want to add one point from for Dr. Fouzia, if you allow me, please.
Please.
I just want to add one, Mr. Imran Sadar asked a question that what is the benefit of, what is the use of presidential election if president has no say in it? Well, let me just clarify this, because he said counter argument. We are not countering it. We are just stating the fact. It's Islamic Republic of Iran. And Islamic side covers by the Wali Faqih system, placed in very much right into the center. And then People's Parliament, Majlis, this Majlis, we call it, members, different elected from different parts of the country that represent the president heads that. So the system in Iran is such architected or constructed that is why it is necessary for them to, they call it popular legitimacy to this system. The people are elected, representative come to the parliament, and they have their representative, the head of the representatives, president in this case. It's not that the president has no power at all, but the major issues are decided in the end, regional defense security policy by the supreme leader. So this is just one. And I think the rest, if other panelists wants to answer, I'm very happy they can do it on economic.
Ambassador RIFFAT, would you like to answer this question about the Iran and Pakistan's bilateral relations and economic cooperation?
Well, yes. In fact, the estimates that have been made by both our governments is that our bilateral trade has a potential of 5 billion. And at the moment, we're nowhere near that. The fact that the present government has also initiated opening of border markets along our borders. If you remember, there was only one trading post or border post before at Afghanistan and Zaidan, but now Mirjawa, but now we have 2, 3 more openings. Now, trade and economy is, of course, the way forward. It is the way in which both these countries will be able to improve their interdependencies, economic interdependencies. And Iran always looks forward to Pakistani products. And we too, as an energy deficient country, can find ways in getting economic assistance from Iran in the field of energy, especially in electricity and in gas. The gas pipeline, of course, is another complicated issue which can be resolved once we are able to get around the sanctions. But economy and trade is the way forward. And also, don't forget, I mentioned also when I was giving my speech that Afghanistan is a very important area where we can play a very good role. The two countries can cooperate in ensuring stability in Afghanistan. I think that in these are two areas, the economic sector and stability in Afghanistan, because after the Americans pull out, it's going to depend upon the role of regional countries. And our role, Iran's role, China's role, Russia's role is all going to be very important. It will help us. The nearer we are, the closer we cooperate with Iran, it will also help us in offsetting some of the influence that we are suffering from India in its role in Afghanistan. So these are all areas where we can cooperate with Iran and build better relationships.
Okay. Yes, Dr. ATHAR, you want to add something?
A very small point, just one small point in bilateral relations. I've looked into this when the gas pipeline and all this were happening. One of the important element which actually affected Pakistan-Iran's relation had been sectarian angle of the conflict, which somehow the non-state actors or others we have perpetrated. But because of the improved relations during this past, decade or so, on this angle, it will also be very useful, helpful to clarify and to sort of reduce those tension and engage. As I think Her Excellency rightly pointed out, we really need energy, and we should negotiate with Iran as well, and maybe expanding that. As we all know, China is investing huge hundreds of billions of dollars in Iran's energy program and all others. I think around 400 and some $25 billion. A very big MOU was signed between Iran and China, if I'm not incorrect. So I think this would give also, the idea is, as she mentioned, and also we are referring to acquire maximum stability out of our regional partners, and Iran being a brotherly country and very close to our borders, an important country in the region and globally. It is very important for us to have Iran on our side, and convince Iran also to not to actually also look Pakistan on the side, that when we have relation with the US, they are all bilateral relations are mutually not exclusive, they are inclusive. Our national security interest tells us to have relation both with Saudi Arabia and Iran, so they should not be mutually exclusive. So I think improving economic relations and bilateral trade, and giving Pakistani product into Iranian market would definitely enhance and build people-to-people contact, and also involving Chamber of Commerce of both countries. Of course, we do Iran face problems of sanctions, due to which some issues about the opening of letter of credit and others do affect, and there is a problem in that area, but that of course for Iran to decide, Iran's regional and Iran's national security policies, how they will shape in the future. So they will overcome with these international sanctions, that Dr. Ashraf said. Very rightfully, Dr. Afzal, that it's all in favor of plus for the next generation of Iran. If Iran open up more and, somehow manage to discard those sanctions she is under. Thank you.
Dr. Ashraf, you want to add something?
No, I think that question has been dealt with. The only question I can maybe add a bit of comment to, and that is the relationship with Afghanistan. I think that the challenge there, of course, is that we all do this, and I'm guilty of it too, is talking about the Taliban as a singular entity. And of course, they're not. They're a very fragmented coalition. So it adds another layer of complexity when you're negotiating, when you're setting up a policy. And if the Taliban do so in a sort of a semi or actual governmental sense, that policy, that negotiation becomes complex and fragmented, because there are these barons, these fiefdoms, where people have their own agendas and their own power, and they won't necessarily agree with whatever the leadership has agreed with. And that complexity becomes even more because you have now an increasing influence of Daesh or ISIS. Now, a lot of people do exaggerate that, but it is relatively small, but they do tend to have a disproportionate impact as spoilers. That is what they specialize in, disruption. And the final thing, of course, is what happens to the current government in Afghanistan, which is at its heart very much comprised of erstwhile warlords. And many of them have amassed massive amounts of ammunition and other means for the future, because culturally they know that the only thing that people can guarantee in Afghanistan politics is that they will be out of power. Everybody changes power. And so they have planned for the opposition, which may well lead to violence. Now, this is one area I would love to be proved to be wrong, but I am afraid I don't have any optimistic view of Afghanistan. I dearly wish I could be optimistic, and I would love it if something miraculous happens and Afghanistan gets the peace it deserves. But because of this fragmentation, because of all the problems I've listed, I don't think Iran can do much. And Pakistan can't do a huge amount. It can probably do a lot more than Iran to help. But the problems in Afghanistan internally are so complex that even the Afghans, with the best help in the world, will struggle to solve their problems.
Thank you so much, Dr. Afzal. Now I have last question because we are running short of time. It's a question for Dr. Athar Javed. Dr. Khurram Abbas from Islamabad Policy Research Institute, he would like to highlight that Mr. Athar said that Iran's elections will not affect Pakistan. However, in past we have observed that the conservative presidents create a stressed environment prone to regional conflicts, hatred towards Arabs, and provoke identity and civilizational superiority. In this environment, Pakistan-Iran relations directly get affected as it becomes very difficult for Pakistan to balance relationship with GCC and Iran. Sir, would you like to comment?
Of course, I'm
Now,
going to comment on that. I think Dr. Khurram Abbas, first of all, thank you very much for the question. But I really would like you to, first of all, I would appreciate if you, whenever you have a chance, to look into the history of, all kind of history between Pakistan and Iran. This is very important. Social relations, religious relations, sectarian angle. Please do study very, very deeply. I would give you, first of all, president has nothing to do, Iranian president, nothing to do with all what happened on the ground. It doesn't come from the presidents. President doesn't order to create stress. And as we all know that the policies between our very honorable ambassador referred to already, that Rahbar, the supreme leader, Wali Faqih, whose word is the last word, his relations and his inclination towards Pakistan is great. And I can tell you, because I've been to Iran several times and I lived there, I know the system, and we can explain to you that these stress and tension, hated Arab, and this never happened just now. Historically, between Persia and Arabs, this has been for hundreds of years, even from the day of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. This has been the case. We cannot really lump this on or put this that the stress and all these hatred towards Arab. It is not the case. If you know that Iran also has an Arab side, this Tabriz, this Arab, and Saudi Arabia, Eastern Saudi Arabia is all Shia. And if you know to Saudis, you go in Saudi Arab. If you talk about Shia Sunni, they wouldn't like it. I can tell you. Anyone can try that. They do not want to, because they consider this is not the case as you asking your question, that somehow the president election will affect. It is nothing to do with our other dynamics. You see our sectarian dynamics evolved in the post 1970, these evolution of the invasion of in Afghan war, and then this angle has been from the past. This is a historical relationship which could not find its space properly in the history. But if you look at the unity from now, I mean, I can tell you that even Rahbar's office and from Pakistan, there is an interfaith delegation which was headed by Ayatollah Mehdi Hadavi Tehrani, who has done for 25 years enormous work globally. He was invited to DC and also to Islamabad and to Copenhagen, everywhere. So we must understand that the stress, tension, social tension between our societies, sectarian especially, has to do with ideological positions of those religious, those leaders, those who are technically not, we can't call them proper religious scholars. If you talk with the religious scholars, high-end scholars, they would tell you from Mufti Azam Pakistan to the Ayatollah ul-Uzma sitting in Qom, for example, they will tell you that the religious, political differences become more religious and historical context is addressed by Pakistan. We will not do that. The relations between Arabs and Persians have been historically like this. So we cannot really put a blame on president of Iran or other that to dictate this framework. I would really suggest you, I would appreciate if you can take a deeper look into it, because this will also, and it's a great question to ask because it would clarify that it is not the case. The hate syndrome exist in all sects across the board. I mean, look at the Islamophobia. What, for example, a Canadian family had done nothing to that person. You could see this happen there. It was not due to Prime Minister Trudeau's liberal policies. It happened. It happens in the different countries. It happened here. It happened in Pakistan. In India. In India, look at India. Nobody mentions India. I mean, the height of the hate syndrome in India of the BJP or RSS has destroyed the entire socio-political structure and the secular face of India. This is important to understand, that the social tensions, the pressures come from unwanted, unwarranted ideological positions when we learn the religion. We don't want to learn the religion which gives you that there should be no tafarqa, there should be no dissension between different sects. And a true Muslim would definitely portray that. This is my intake on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Akhtar Javed. We have a lot of questions, but due to shortage of time, I think we should move towards the conclusion. Thank you so much, distinguished speakers, for a very enlightening session. And once again, I would also like to thank IRS for conducting this important event. Ladies and gentlemen, before I invite Dr. Rana Athar to conclude this session, I just want to add a few words in Pakistani perspective, although it is discussed earlier. While in all likelihood, it appears that a hardliner will replace Rouhani with Chief Justice of Iran, Ibrahim Raisi, leading the polls. It is important for Pakistan to keep up active engagement with the next president. A stable Iran is crucial for Pakistan and the region, and Pakistan and Iran share several outstanding border transpass and smuggling issues for which economic cooperation and regional connectivity is required. It is indeed heartening to highlight that since the last over 1 decade, Iran and Pakistan are coordinating their efforts to enhance their bilateral trade. Being a common friend, Pakistan has also expressed its desire to play a constructive role in seeking rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And Pakistan has played its role in the past and will continue to remain engaged with them as a closer friend and as a closer friend of both Iran and Saudi Arabia. Thank you so much. Now I would request Dr. Rana Athar Javed for closing keynotes and concluding for the event. Over to you, Dr. Saab.
Let me thank you again, all the panelists, and of course the moderator, and very honorable, my very good friend, Ambassador Nadeem from IRS, and also, to all the, it's a wonderful discussion, and I really enjoyed, Dr. Afzal, your intake on Afghanistan. We may have a chance next time, maybe on Afghanistan, we could share our interest. And of course, very honorable, respectable Ambassador, Her Excellency RIFFAT MASOOD, had also actually the real times. That's why when it came to economics, so I requested her to give a review, because she spent a very good time there and she had done an excellent job for Pakistan. I would like to conclude only on the few lines, because we had already all these discussions. I don't want repetition, but number one, that current presidential election and must be looked into the way Iran's political system operates, their functions. It's the role of Guardian Council in vetting the candidates, even for Council of Experts and all other functionaries must be looked into this system, the way Iran wants to protect its Islamic aspect and this Republican aspect of the country. And this, of course, what we call it very oversimplify or simplifying hardliner or other. We have seen during our comments that Iranian president does play an enormous role when it comes to the external policy, the foreign policy, and other responses, modern responses to different nation states. When it comes to the ideological position of Iran in different countries, to a different country, US, Israel, and other, Saudi Arabia, the supreme leader's word is last, and in others as well. Nuclear negotiation, President has played a role. Jawad Zarif, the foreign minister, and the chief negotiator also must have been seen in a way that his role, where they were thinking that maybe because of something happened and his role will be diminished, it will continue, and there will be other, it will be complex, but I think it will continue. So the president's election as such will not have any impact outside Iran, but within Iran, of course, the powers in parliament and in others will slide into the hands of, as we call them. We don't call them hardline, we call them more conservative, because the term hardliners is a loaded terminology, because all the conservative, even previous presidents, have negotiated with the West in different forms and shapes. Because if supreme leader doesn't allow a negotiation, nothing will happen. It means that conservatives and reformists, on the matter of US relation, on the matter of economic development, they do have a unanimous view towards the world. And thank you very much again. And that's my conclusion.